Okay, so today we're going to be talking about predicting disease infection periods, and due to time I'm only going to be focusing on 4 diseases today: apple scab, fire blight, sooty blotch and fly speck, and finally bacterial spot. So for any of the folks here who grow peaches and battle bacterial spot, hopefully I'll have some nuggets of wisdom for you in this talk and in the next talk, the copper talk. So as far as how I go about evaluating, or as far as talking about each of these diseases, we'll cover the disease cycle first, what constitutes the infection conditions, tools to help you predict the infection, and also finally management. So first, apple scab. So if anyone has been in any of my talks, this is a very familiar slide. With apple scab spores, they overwinter in fallen leaves. And then come spring, in those leaves, it gets the environmental cues, the spores mature in those leaves, and then around green tip, those spores are mature, and then with the first spring rains, the spores are released. So it's a combination of temperature and leaf wetness that promotes the release of those mature spores from those overwintering leaves that could be hanging around. This spore dispersal, all the spores aren't released at once. Mother Nature wouldn't make it that easy for us. They are gradually released over time, and the peak, the max amount of spores that are available and released occurs during bloom to petal fall. And so in that primary infection period, and that primary period is noted by those spores from the overwintering leaves. And so that can occur until about mid-June. So there's like a 2-month window from about mid-April, early April, till about mid-June. Green tip till about early second cover. If you get infection on the tree from any of those primary spores, those spores will produce the secondary spores called conidia. When you get to that point, it's very difficult to control the disease. So the goal is to interrupt the cycle at this primary phase. And so just to illustrate, to kind of give you even more of a visual as far as how the spores are released over time, we have they start maturing, and this is results from our research lab at Penn State in Biglerville. And this is very consistent over the last several years. We have a couple spores being released around green tip, half-inch green tip, tight cluster. But then as you can see, the max number of spores are being released from bloom to petal fall. And so it's during that time, this time period right here, that if disease conditions are present, it is very critical to manage the disease during that time. So the question is, what are those disease conditions? What do we have to be on the lookout for? And as far as temperature, it's dependent on temperature and leaf wetness. And so temperatures, you can see, you can have apple scab infection occur as low as 34 degrees as long as you have almost 2 days of leaf wetness. However, during the early spring, mid-spring, May time, if the temperatures are average between 61 to 75 degrees, and if you have at least 6 hours of leaf wetness, that can be enough to trigger an infection event. And for anyone who doesn't have a weather station at their home or in their orchard, they can easily calculate this manually by keeping track of the max and min temperature, and also when you have a wetting event, going outside, keeping track of when the wetting event starts, but most importantly when that wetting event ends or when those leaves dry. It's severe when we have a rainy spring. If it is hot and dry or dry during the spring, the severity is significantly less. And for our area in Biglerville last year, we had a pretty dry May, and apple scab, it was an issue here and there, but it wasn't like what we've seen before in years past. So we dodged a bullet last year. As far as tools that you can utilize in order to help you predict apple scab infection periods, because the goal is to get your protection on prior to the infection event, Cornell has a program online called NEWA. It's called Network Environmental Weather Applications. And what this is that this website's freely accessible online. In order to connect to the website, or to get your information on the website, you need to have a particular weather station, and it's called a RainWise station. And that's denoted by those little green leaves here. And in Pennsylvania, we have a handful of stations, but in Maryland, there is a weather station. It's Larryland Farms. So they're located right here it's in Woodbine, Maryland, so Howard, Carroll counties. So if you are near that area, you can access the weather information from that site, even though you don't have a weather station. But keep in mind, it's the weather station occurring on that particular orchard area. And also you can utilize airports. So if anyone's near the Washington, D.C. or Baltimore airports, you can easily access the weather information from there as well. So what to do, how to utilize this? Well, if you go down to the drop-down menu here to pest forecast, the first one's apple diseases, and there's a bunch of other pests that you can also look into as well. But for argument's sake here and for our purposes, we're just going to pretend I clicked on apple diseases. And then this is the next screen. It shows you can select a disease, a weather station, and your date of interest. And so for selecting a disease, you have 3 choices: scab, fire blight, and fly speck. You can pick a weather station and then your date of interest. And for our learning purposes today, I picked a date from last year. I picked apple scab and the weather station. At Penn State, we don't have a rain-wise weather station, but the farm next to us has a weather station. So I put apple scab, that station, and then I picked a date and clicked calculate. So as you can see here, apple scab and the Biglerville Hollabaugh orchards, and then I picked April 29th, and then I clicked calculate, and then this is the screen that it showed me. Now, the only thing that you would have to do that would be unique to your situation is to change the green tip date. For Hollabaugh orchards, the green tip date last year was April 3rd, but say for us, maybe it was a week later for whatever reason. I could change that date, and then the data down here would just modify that according to the date. It tells you what the apple scab spore maturity is. And then down here is what's most important as far as if there's any infection events, the date to symptoms, the average temperature, the leaf wetness in hours, because these weather stations have a leaf wetness sensor, and also finally the rain amount. In the case of right here, so it's April 29th, the weather station also takes into account the forecast, which it communicates with the satellites. And in this case, the prediction is there will be, the average temperature will be around 57 degrees on April 30th, and on May 1st it'll be about 53 degrees. There is a forecast where about 0.19 inches are going to fall. And they say this is a combined event, meaning that there could be multiple rain events in the same time period, so they call that combined. But what the gist of this is telling me is that we have the appropriate average temperature and the appropriate leaf wetness hours, because when you combine the 2 days, that's 10 leaf wetness hours, 57, 53 degrees, that is for that temperature, 10 hours is enough to cause an infection event, and this will come up as red telling me there's an infection event. So it's April 29th, I look at this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there will be an infection event in tomorrow and the next day. I have to get a protection on right now. So this takes the guesswork out of whether or not, as far as anticipating your needs for how you're going to have to protect your crops out in the field. So this is very helpful. And again, when you have that prediction of a scab event, it's good to remember, where are we in that potential apple scab spore dispersal? If we were at the start of bloom at April 29th, I would say to myself, if we're having an infection event, it's bloom time, I can anticipate we're going to have a lot of spores available out there. I want to make sure I have a good chemical out there protecting my foliage. As far as what you can use, half-inch green tip to tight cluster, you can use Sillet. Sillet is only labeled from half-inch green tip through pink. And before I go any further, I forgot to mention the most important note up here is that you want to make sure that you're rotating your chemistries, spray by the numbers, spray by the FRAC group code numbers, so by the single modes of action, and tank mixing with a broad spectrum chemical such as Captan or Mancozeb. I like to use Mancozeb and recommend Mancozeb because Mancozeb has a long pre-harvest interval, so Mancozeb comes in handy for the early season. So 1/2 inch green tip to tight cluster, again, Psyllitt, that is a unique chemistry, so you get that chemistry out of the way. Pink to bloom, we want something good, something really durable, and that can knock back those scab spores or protect the leaves that prevent the scab spores from causing infection. That could be Fontellus. This is an SDHI. Another SDHI chemical that will be available for you this season is Aprovia, and that is from Syngenta. As far as petal fall to first cover, Vanguard, which is another unique chemistry, that is an option as well. As far as other products, you can use Flint or Inspire Super, Luna Tranquility, Indar, Maravon, Luna Sensation. Something to keep in mind about Luna Tranquility, Inspire Super, Maravon, and Luna Sensation, they have 2 chemicals in that product. So you have to be mindful of the 2 modes of actions, the 2 different frac codes in there, especially when you're wanting to rotate your chemistries. As far as another protectant, in addition to Mancozeb and Captan, Omega is also available to you as well. This is from Syngenta. It's broad spectrum. It does a good job not only as far as keeping early summer diseases in check, but also later summer diseases in check as well. And I'll mention that a little bit later. I'm not talking much about powdery mildew right now. There are good chemistries for powdery mildew like Raleigh and Top Guard, but if your main focus, if you don't have much issue with powdery mildew, sulfur is always good. Add a couple pounds of sulfur into your tank mix and you'll keep your powdery mildew in check. As far as rusts follow the same as far as wetness and temperature like scab. If you are throwing in Mancozeb, that will keep your rusts in check, but some of these chemistries will also keep your rusts in check too. So you get, you'll get a couple, you'll be able to kill a couple birds with 1 stone. As far as wet weather, this may look familiar from last year. If it's a really rainy early season, you're going to want to apply fungicides during wet weather. It seems counterintuitive, but you need that protection on there. You can use broad spectrums like Mancozeb or sulfur or Captan. As far as the rule of thumb, as the durability of your chemical on the leaves, you have to remember that anything will be washed off with 2 inches of rain. And especially if warm rains are occurring over a period of time, we may have a crazy spring this year where it's raining every other day. You can't wait for the rain to stop. You have to get out there with something. Using broad spectrums is your best bet. As far as the duration of product, light rain works best. Don't apply it during heavy rain. Heavy rain's just going to wash everything off. As far as what the limitations will be, well, making sure that you have the right equipment and that it's calibrated properly. And then it's also ideal, depending on how much acreage you have, this is really more of an issue if you've got vast amounts of, like hundreds of acres of apples. But if you have a smaller acreage, it'll be much easier for you to get out there and keep things covered. But the goal is that you want to get your coverage on there in a short period of time. And in Pennsylvania, folks are really, they like alternate row middle sprays because they can kind of get in there faster. I promote complete sprays because there are some issues you can encounter with alternate row middle sprays, but if you're pressed for time, alternate row middle does work. Prioritize your coverage. If you get to the point where you're feeling overwhelmed, focus on the cultivars that are most scab susceptible. And also you want to get back in there as far as quickly as possible if rain is occurring and rain is washing things off. Okay, quickly go through fire blight. So let's just move over here, the most critical stage with the blossom. Blossoms are open and the bacteria, they make their way to the blossoms via insects or rain or wind. The bacteria is going to colonize those stigmas. You have a wetting event, and the wetting event can be rain or dew. You don't need a prolonged period of time like with apple scab. You just need a little bit of moisture in order to wash that bacteria from the stigmas down into the nectaries in order to get blossom blight. As far as the conditions, again, you can use NUA. NUA is very good at predicting. It utilizes a software program called Cougar Blight, or it's actually, I'm not sure. You can actually use do Cougar Blight by hand, but the way that Cougar Blight works, and this is in contrast to anyone who uses Mary Blight, is that Cougar Blight uses a 4-day accumulation of degree hours. It uses today, yesterday, 2 days ago, and 3 days ago, and as far as an accumulation. As far as how it determines the risk, well, the thing is you need to input whether or not fire blight occurred around or in your orchard the year before. And again, the bloom time date as well is also critical. These can be easily manipulated by you. In the case here, I picked February 4th, and as you can see, February 4th, I am in an extreme infection period, meaning the blossoms are open, we've reached the degree hours. I had fire blight in my orchard last year, meaning there's a great risk. I need to get out there now to spray. So again, this will help you utilize as far as predicting, mostly anticipating an infection event. Fire blight is good in the sense, or I should say the fire blight prediction here is good in the sense it gives you several days as far as looking several days ahead. And this is important, especially if we may have a protracted bloom and you have to get out there and be protecting your blossoms more than once. As far as what you can utilize to manage blossom blight, well, when the blossoms are open and you have the infection conditions present, you want those blossoms protected. What can you use? Antibiotics are most effective. Streptomycin is still the best antibiotic to use. As far as where we stand with streptomycin resistance, I am working on that as we speak. But as far as right now, I anticipate strep resistance is probably low in the area, unlike in other parts of the country where strep was abused at the wrong periods of time, where strep resistance has occurred. Right now, strep works. It's the best because it kills the bacteria, and it also is partially systemic. It penetrates the blossom a bit, so it can kind of get into the flower and kill any bacteria that may have snuck in there. Other options are available are casugamycin and oxytetracycline. As far as if you're thinking about resistance management because of the force spray maximum, I don't recommend tank mixing oxytet or strep. I've seen actually a decrease in control when tank mixing those two antibiotics. I don't know why. So with that said, I would recommend just using strep by itself without tank mixing it. As far as what else you can do at bloom, what else can you tank mix streptomycin with? Well, there's a few things you could tank mix it with. Products that seem to enhance the resistance, it seems to goose the natural resistance of the plant. One is Actigard. Actigard will be made available to you this year from Syngenta, and it's used as a tank mix with strep, and you apply strep and Actigard as a tank mix at bloom time, and it seems to help give some protection not only to the blossoms, but it seems to help mitigate shoot blight later on. So you get a little more, you definitely get a lot of bang for your buck. This isn't a cheap chemical, this is quite expensive, but it does seem to have some protection for shoot blight. Another thing you can think about combining with streptomycin is regalia. There's some good results out there by tank mixing streptomycin and regalia as far as lessening the severity of the blossom blight, but also giving you some protection for shoot blight later on. The prohexadione calcium, Apogee or Kudos. This is another product you can tank mix with streptomycin at bloom time. At 2 ounces to the acre, it seems that this thickens the cells of the shoots. However, it doesn't have a negative effect on growth as what we would think that the plant growth regulator Apogee would have. It actually, it allows some growth, but it makes the shoots less desirable for the bacteria to penetrate, which is a good thing. And so you get shoot blight control, but you also still get some growth, which is good. This is most beneficial on young trees, those dwarf trees that you're trying to really to get going and wanting growth. So this seems to work best on this. As far as big older trees, trees that are semi-dwarf trees, you're going to want to use a much higher rate of apogee in order to get that effect. And then finally, you may be thinking about the use of copper. You can use copper at bloom time as far as an alternative, which I'll mention in a minute. However, what we've seen is that there's a decrease in efficacy for control when tank mixing streptomycin and copper. So I don't recommend tank mixing those two. As far as alternatives, there's Blossom Protect. Blossom Protect, which is available in Maryland. This is a living yeast. It coats the blossoms, and what it does is that it prevents the bad bacteria from entering into the nectaries. So it acts as almost like an antagonist. It blocks the front door into the plant, and the bacteria can't get in there. There are restrictions as far as what fungicides and what insecticides you can use during bloom time if you're using this product, because it is a living product. It is a living yeast. Queva and double nickel, this is a copper. This is a bacterial-based product. It's not a living product, it's bacterial-based. This is another option that folks who want something in an alternative to streptomycin. Serenade Optimum is similar to double nickel. It's bacterial based. 2% lime sulfur and 2% fish oil. There's been very good success out west with using this combination. Lime sulfur will thin your blossoms, but it seems that the lime sulfur does have bactericidal capabilities of protecting your blossoms. The phosphonate products or phosphorus acid products like Rampart, Fostral, and Prophyte, these we've seen in the field in our own experiments. We haven't seen this as being effective for managing fire blight. So I would discourage you from using those products in a blossom blight protection program. As far as what to do from bloom to terminal bud set, again, that apogee application, you may have to apply several applications of apogee, especially if the trees just don't stop growing. And we had this issue last year where we had so much rain and the trees just never stopped growing. Anything that's green and succulent will be susceptible to fire blight. You know, make sure you're monitoring your orchards really carefully and pruning out when you see infections. If you can't get to the infections to prune it out, and you find yourself pruning out buckets worth of prunings, stop. You may be doing more harm than good. As far as being able to prune out in time, I'm talking few strikes. If you're getting into 10, 20 strikes per tree, that's too many to prune out. You're going to be goosing the tree to produce new growth and actually making the problem worse. In that case, you just sort of want to just sit tight and wait for the tree to stop growing until you go in there. You don't want to spray antibiotics unless there's a major environmental event like hail or high wind. High wind is enough to cause trauma blight. So keep that in mind if we have any crazy storms coming up the coast, like remnants of some hurricanes or tropical storms that may or may not produce hail. That high wind is enough to cause trauma. And another important thing is that you want to control piercing, sucking insects. Okay, I may have to kind of quickly go through the summer diseases. Sooty blotch fly speck. Again, you can access this through NUA. What the date that you need to keep in mind to change is your petal fall date, because sooty blotch fly speck, as far as the hours that the leaf wetness hours that are accumulated, starts at 10 days after petal fall. And then in the case of NUA, it uses a 170 hours threshold, 170 hours leaf wetness threshold in order to control. And in this case, I picked June 10th. And since it's anticipated that we will have reached the threshold to manage sooty blotch fly speck by the next day or two, I need to get out there with a cover spray. And at this time, this is like around second cover, you should already be out there spraying Captan or Captan and Topsin M. That will keep the sooty blotch fly speck in check. And so just to go through real quickly, Sanitation is a real key with sooty blotch and fly speck and fruit rots. As far as chemicals, as I mentioned, Topsin and Captan. Also from Certus, this is a polyoxin D salt. If you're looking for an alternative to Topsin M with regards to, or Captan with regards to sooty blotch and fly speck, this worked really well. I was impressed with how this worked last year. It was the first time that I evaluated it. But we had a real bad sooty blotch fly speck year, so, and the fruit that we had were clean. So this is definitely a worthy contender for management. Again, Omega, as I had mentioned, for fruit rots, your QI fungicides, the strobilurins, Fracgrode group 11. We're talking about Flint, we're talking about Maravon, Luna Sensation. Also, Serenade Optimum too seems to be another worthy contender for fruit rots. I've looked at this the last 2 seasons. As far as late summer sprays, it seems to hold up even in storage as far as keeping the fruit rots in check. So this is also another product to consider as well. Okay, for Bacterial Spot, I'm just going to go through this real quickly because I'm running out of time. If bacterial spot conditions are present, when we're talking about warm and wet, which is pretty much for every disease, just about every disease that we talk about, you're going to have to be managing every single week if the conditions are present, especially if you have susceptible cultivars. You can stretch it out to a 2-week period if it's hot and dry. If it's dry, the disease will slow down. You need to be rotating multiple products. There isn't a silver bullet. Oxytetracycline is your antibiotic of choice. We'll talk about copper this afternoon. Serenade Optimum also works well. As far as your alternative stone fruits, such as apricots, plums, pluots, these aren't labeled. As far as Oxytet's not labeled for these fruits, so you have to be mindful of those. Phosphorus acid, the base products, Rampart, Fostral, Profite. I have not seen good luck with this, so I'm reluctant to recommend this being part of your rotation. I looked at it 2 years ago during a real severe time. I didn't get very good control. I want to look at it again this year, maybe combining it with something else, because maybe it needs something else to sort of to see the efficacy of this product. But as far as a standalone product, I'm not very confident in my recommendation for it. Okay, take-home messages. As far as warm and wet favor many diseases, keeping an eye on those weather conditions, getting that protection on prior to the infection event. Apple scab, you might need a spray during the rain. Fire blight, consider tank mixing streptomycin with another product like Regalia, Actigard, Apogee at a very low rate, especially if you have small trees. You'll see some good results with mitigating shoot blight. Sooty blotch fly speck, sanitation is key for this. That is half the game as far as management. And finally, bacterial spot. It's important to be vigilant again of the weather conditions, because the only way to keep that disease in check and it not exploding is having spray regimes every single week. And finally, this is our old tree fruit production guide. This is the new one. 2016, 2017, it is ready, available. This is the information for you in order to contact them. I apologize, I wish I had I did have little cards, but I didn't get a chance to get them from the person who had them. But you can just go to this website or give them a call, and it's in PDF and as well as the hard copy. There's a lot of updates in there, but a really cool thing is we have colored pictures in there now of insects and diseases. Not everything, but a good fair chunk of them. So that's a pretty good feature this year. And then that's it. Okay.
Yeah, we do have that address in the folder.
Oh, good. Excellent. Okay. Yep. Excellent. All right.
Any quick questions?
Apologize. That was fast.
Through line, so she will have questions. Bob, one question.
I just want to hit her with one, because there's some real concern about Topsin M and cross resistance with fungicide, especially in strawberries and small fruit. And considering maybe somebody's growing little apples and small fruit, your comment on some of the other materials that could be used instead of the instead of the
Topsin M.
That Captan combination would be very helpful in newsletters and etc.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Kari.